Very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. Welcome to Let's Talk. We're delighted to be with you on the airways of Second Advent Radio, and those who are viewing via SLC Adventist or SLC Church channel or on our Facebook channel. We are just so happy that you have chosen to be with us again. This afternoon, we are continuing our discussion on marital rape. We did this 2 weeks ago. And before I even pray, I want to just make a few announcements. So this time, I want first to inform all of our listeners that next week, we will not be having Let's Talk. Yes, it's the first in 2 years, but we will not be having Let's Talk next week. Next week, I will be at the General Conference session, and the program and schedule will make it difficult to fit in Let's Talk. We do apologize for that. I suppose on SLC Adventist, they probably do a repeat of last week's program, not this week, but last week's program, because on the following Sabbath, the 18th of June, we're going to be having part 2 of our discussion on abortion, and that is going to be the interesting aspect of it. I also would like to inform you that this afternoon, right after Let's Talk, I do understand that there will be the program Truth Be Told. That's a program sponsored by the Youth Department, and this afternoon they are discussing the Christian politics and activism, part 2. So stay tuned on SLC Adventist this afternoon after Let's Talk for Truth Be Told. Well, let us have a word of prayer before we go into our discussion today as we discuss this important subject of marital rape. Eternal Father, be with us as we share together. Guide us in this important discussion. Take full control, we pray in your precious name. Amen. Well, friends, we have with us this afternoon 2 individuals that you are by now very familiar with. We have attorney Natasha Baker. Attorney Baker is works in the U.S. Virgin Islands, federal prosecutor in the Attorney General's office. Did I get that right, Sister Natasha? I'm always mixing up your work experience and that kind of stuff. But we're delighted to have you with us. Very capable and well-loved here on Let's Talk. And we also have with us Sister Beverly Chan, social worker, CEO of Davis Memorial Hospital. Good afternoon to both of you. Natasha, first to you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be back.
Good afternoon. And it's good to be here again.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we started 2 weeks ago with a very important discussion on marital rape. While we were on, we did share a definition of rape that was to some challenging, but a very significant definition, which suggests that it is unlawful sexual activity and usually sexual intercourse carried out forcibly on the threat of injury against a person's will or with a person who is beneath a certain age or incapable of valid consent because of mental illness, mental deficiency, intoxication, unconsciousness, or deception. So having spoken at length about that definition and about prevailing issues, we went in to talk about the whole issue of marital rape. I want to pick it up this afternoon by asking, now I'm aware that in some jurisdictions, it can be determined that a husband and a wife are not sexually active. If they're not sexually active for a period of 1 year, that a divorce can be had. Natasha Baker, on the issue of having this divorce, I don't know whether it is how you term that in your jurisdiction, but I know in my territory, if it can be proved that no sexual intercourse took place for a period of 1 year, that a divorce is almost automatic. But my question is, does this not suggest that the law is on, maybe I should say, expects that there should be sexual activity in marriage? So some people may determine, well, since that's the expectation, if my spouse doesn't want to have sexual activity, then shouldn't I make sure that we don't end up by having a divorce by forcing her? Sister Natasha, let's hear your response to that.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. It's interesting that you note, yes, some jurisdictions have a caveat about, sexual intercourse. I think generally, even outside of the law, when you think about marital relations overall, an important part of that is sexual activity. And so if that does not exist in a marriage, obviously we're talking about an aspect of marriage that has significantly broken down. And whether or not, like your jurisdiction, the law specifically says that you haven't had sex for a year and therefore that's grounds for divorce, generally, that suggests there's perhaps outside medical reasons or just, basic relations. It suggests that there is some breakdown in a marriage. And generally, when you can articulate to the court that there's such a breakdown in the marriage relations that the marriage cannot continue, then the court would, of course, consider those factors to determine if there's a legitimate divorce is to be had. So it's not just about the sex itself or the lack thereof, but more so a general decision as to whether there's a breakdown in a marriage. And I think what you pointed out as lack of sexual intercourse is just one area that someone can prove that there's a breakdown. Now, I think generally, yes, there is an expectation that, marriage is a part of sex, but I don't think that transfers now to that if I don't have it, then it should be forced. I don't think that's what the law is suggesting.
I'm glad you took the slant that you did in suggesting, well, if there is no sexual activity in the marriage for such a long period, there's an indication that there is some kind of breakdown in the marital relationship. So this afternoon, we really want to speak to the issue of how can we reverse that trend where marriages go sour. We're going to get back to that in a while, but I can say that for those of you who are listening, if you're having challenges in your marital relationship, we do a Let's Talk we do a program right on SLC Adventist and on Second Advent called Marriage Encounter. It is devoted to issues relating to marriage. And for those of you who are interested in that, Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m., that is Eastern Caribbean time. It is aired on SLC Adventist and on Second Advent Radio, and of course on Second Advent Radio, both live on Thursdays at 9:30 and 6:30 p.m. and also Thursday mornings. It streams on Second Advent Facebook page. So you may want to tune in to Marriage Encounter to get some very useful suggestions on how you can improve your marital relationship. But for now, as we discuss the issue of marital rape, Sister Chan, the issue of forcing your spouse to have sex with you, And we're speaking from a perspective of a man doing this to a woman. We're going to reverse the roles in a little while from now. But is this, in your experience as a social worker, is this something that is a challenge?
Interestingly enough, no, Pastor. My experience, I've never had a case where the woman was kind of forcing the man to have sex, and it did not realize, and it ended up in some sort of dispute. What I know when we're talking about rape, a woman raping a man, a number of years.
I think you kind of misunderstood my question. I'm not talking about the woman to the man. I'm talking about the man to the woman right now.
Oh, okay. Could you say that again for me?
So what I was asking is whether in your experience you've had ladies complaining that their spouses or significant others have been forcing them to have sexual activity when they don't want to.
Not a whole lot. I've been doing this for about 30 years. I'm gonna say not, yes, not a whole to the rare end of difficulties in relationship. Because when people come for counseling, they generally come with all kinds of circular issues. I am the one who more often than not will ask them, where is sex in all this? So it is not something generally even though it is not happening, even our challenges, it's not something that I find generally comes up very on a first glance. What I know for sure is that sex, when it comes to rape and women complain about being, it also has to border a little bit on personalities. I know I'm getting into your zone, Professor. There are some women called, based on the personality, but particularly two, they have high tolerance for abuse in relationship, any form of abuse, even sex abuse. Okay, even rape. So some of the things they wouldn't consider in their head, even though they're uncomfortable with it, even though they may not be happy.
Let me jump in here. Let me jump in here.
And this is one of the things that
okay, it appears to me as though your internet is a little delayed there, but I do want to jump in on the point you're making there, the point about women having high tolerance for abuse. Now, that's an interesting observation you're making there. There are some women in relationships and you wonder what caused them to stay in that relationship for so long. You know, some of them perhaps because of dependency syndrome or whatever the issue, you know, they would almost get to the point where they say this is normal. But we want to make it very clear that it is not normal. You know, that is important. And I see Attorney Baker smiling here, and I believe she wants to jump in on this, man. It's definitely not normal. Mm-hmm.
It's not normal, but they don't even know it's not normal, okay? In spite of the information that may share, now you might hear some women saying to others, one is complaining, okay, I'm tired of this, okay? He forces me. And the other personality will come to and say, well, if he wants to give him, you're married to him, he's your husband, okay? So that's where the debate comes in. That is why it is so difficult to draw this real definitive line, because there are women, as I said before, cannot define it. So while the strong personalities are defining it, working towards it, there are some personalities who have a high tolerance for it. So the debate will continue. Yes, you are right. It happens, but they're not even conscious that it is wrong to them, and they're being harmed. And they are being harmed, you know, but it's more often it's suppressed. And it's also used as a coping mechanism, all right? It's also measured for some women. He forces me to have it, and it's because he really loves me, and he wants me, and he doesn't want to go outside, so I have to give in to. There are all kinds of coping mechanisms that women will use to support that behavior. Some women, not all of them.
Thank you so much. Sister Attorney, now let me ask you, if a woman makes a complaint about her husband raping her, how does the court look at it? How do we prove marital rape?
Well, first and foremost, as we discussed the first segment of this, it depends on where you are, because not all jurisdictions have the same laws. And so if you're in a jurisdiction that has done away with the whole idea of spousal consent, then essentially, in the best case scenario, I should say, all you would have to prove is the elements that we had discussed before, which include that it was forced, you were in your right mind, you were not drugged, stuff like that. However, I don't want to make it seem that simple, because first you have to get the courts themselves, the institution of the court is gonna treat it as a crime. The uphill battle will be when you go now to prove it. Say you go to trial, you prove that a crime actually occurred. So now you have to convince, 12 persons, because most juries in a criminal context are made up of 12 persons. You have to prove to 12 persons that this husband raped his wife, or wife raped her husband, in whichever context we're using it. And I think that's where you're gonna run into some problems, because more often than not, some person or persons on that jury have not quite come around to the concept that this is even possible in the context of marriage. And to be able to convince someone that, this in the context of a marriage, a husband can rape his wife, there's gonna be someone there who's gonna say, no, that's not possible. We have that issue. I'm gonna just divert a little bit to prove my point. When we talk about rape in the context of minors, for example, if you have an older person who rape a minor, as straightforward as the law is, as long as this person is under 18, you cannot have sexual intercourse with them if you are in most jurisdictions over 5 years older than them. A lot of people will still look to characteristics of the minor, such, oh, she was fast, or what she was wearing, or what's her parents, or, because we all have these sort of ideas as to what should constitute force and rape and consent that we would then implant into the criminal justice process that will significantly influence whether or not someone is actually able to be convicted for this crime. Now, in jurisdictions where spousal consent is still on the books, then it goes back, I know I was a bit passionate the last time, but it goes back to that sort of nonsensical argument where I'm saying, all it is all other parts of the statute becomes void, because as long as you bring proof that this person is your spouse, then it doesn't matter whether or not they were drugged. It doesn't matter whether or not they were unconscious. It doesn't matter whether or not they were forced or had some sort of weapon. The fact of the matter is this is your spouse, and so it's allowed. That's your defense. So I mean, it just depends, initially on the jurisdiction, and then after how it's treated by members of the public.
So now I think we agreed from our last discussion that sex in marriage is supposed to be consensual. So one of the big issues here is whether or not the man is going to respect, and I did promise that I will come to the opposite, but whether the man is going to respect the woman's rights to say, listen, I am not in the mood, I am not interested, I am not giving consent at this time. So let's just talk to that for a little bit. So if I go back to Sister Chan's line of argument just now, where she was saying that there are some women who have a high tolerance. She may not be interested, she may be tired, she may be feeling unappreciated, unloved, but if the man threatens her and says, listen, this is what you're expected to do, and she may give in. If a person gives in, would that be still considered force?
Interesting.
Greene, you want to get us in trouble here. I'll let Sister Chan go for it.
Yeah, it is so touchy. If she gives in, it is still forced. Yes, it is forced, but who determines that? She will. And one of the things that is also threatening is that it will threaten to go get somebody else. Okay, you want me to go outside of the relationship. Okay, and if I go out, it's your fault. So when the woman begins to perceive that if she doesn't give in, she's likely to lose him to somebody else, it puts her even at a higher risk of tolerating that kind of behavior. All right, but for me, if we go back to the rights and the privilege within the relationship that we spoke about the last time, we have to strike a healthy balance between the two. All right. Yeah, we did say that, it's a privilege to have sex with your wife, but a privilege could be taken away. So we can't tie it into privilege only. All right, because you can give and take. And then if we look at rights only, then we go towards rights without responsibility is barbarism. Okay, so we have and the privilege that you have, because if you love, the more I think about it, if you love your wife, let's go back to the concept of love in this relationship, because so far we're talking about the bolts and nuts of what's happening in rape. But if you love, then love is patient and kind, and the love chapter describes how you will react. However, there is a line between the love and the lust, because the behavior of rape and forced sex and the mannerism strikes hardly towards lust. Okay, but then could you lust after your wife in a relationship? That's a tricky question, but the behavior pattern is skewed towards lust because love doesn't behave that way. And as I said before, right, your rights without the reasonableness. You have a right to sex, but you also have a right to be responsible to the health of the other person. And as you said, Pastor, the respect that the other person desires. But then when we come to long-term consistency of the denial of your husband to sex, well, then that needs therapy. All right. They won't be able to fix that by themselves. All right. They need help. Okay. Because as you know, sex for a woman, as you know, is a part of a total makeup. It's part of a whole being, right? Her mind, her body, her soul, her spirit. Whereas it's not so for a man. And that is a critical dichotomy in the relationship that needs to find a healthy balance to fulfill his need. When a man has a need for sex, it's a real need. Now, I'm not talking on behalf of man because I don't know, but from what I heard and what I hear, it's a real need. And it's uncomfortable, they say, and they need to get this release. So how do we bring that healthy balance between addressing her total being towards the act and also his dying need at a particular moment in time? And in the church, people generally, in my experience, say they generally come without that part of the equation being addressed. But I am the one, as I said before, hearing what's happening, I can tell you that there's no sex here. So when I raise the issue, say, where is sex? Two questions I will ask them, our Christian folks. Where is God in all this? And where is sex in all this? And when it comes to where is sex in all this, it is always, we haven't had sex. We don't sleep together, but that generally doesn't come first, okay? And I generally have to suck it into the equation. So yes, people are not really getting help. They're suffering, but they just don't know how to address it. And again, personality has a role to play in the tolerance that people accept these behaviors and not even know, suppressing the hurt and pain.
Well, I said just before I come to Sister Natasha, I said earlier that I do conduct a program called Marriage Encounter.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why we have been doing that program for, in fact, we have been running that program for perhaps maybe 15 years now. It's because of the need to provide marital education in general to so many persons.
Yes.
There are lots of individuals who are really in a poor state of I almost want to say ignorance when it comes to what constitutes a proper marriage and how they are to treat one another in the marriage. I have discovered, unfortunately, in a number of cases, men have learned incorrectly from society. They feel that, you know, when I marry a woman, I own the woman and she does what I want. She goes when I say, she comes when I say, and that's it, period. So we do have to do a lot of education in this regard. And it is perhaps one of the reasons why you may find in a number of cases where men are challenged by the whole concept of marital rape, because they think, well, if I want sex, there's no way in the world my wife should say, no, I'm not interested. Sister Natasha?
Yeah, I agree with everything. And, you know, Sister Chan hit a lot of points on the head. Legally, I would say to your original question, you know, as Sister Chan said, technically it's not really consent in the way you would want someone to consent to sexual intercourse. But in a legal context, when you're considering someone being charged with the crime of rape, if you're in a jurisdiction where there's no spousal consent, quite frankly, I don't think any court or jury, I'm not even sure that there would be probable cause to arrest someone on those facts. And probable cause is a standard used to determine if there was sufficient evidence to arrest someone for a crime. And while, you know, the person, you know, sort of gave in reluctantly, I think that very fact that, you know, there was no violence, there was no sort of, you know, tangible force or, you know, unconsciousness would kind of suggest that there was no rape. And so in a legal context, you know, that's probably not going to go very far. And I totally agree with Sister Chan. And she said it so in such a philosophical way, you know, that a lot of times that's the reality of where women are, you know, and what they've been taught by society, that regardless of what, you should be fulfilling your husband in bed. And so you have women who themselves may not be fulfilled, or they just don't want to because of whatever external forces in a relationship they're thinking about. And because, as with anything else, like cooking and cleaning and washing clothes and rearing children, women are expected to uphold these things the same way they feel about sex. They're supposed to please their husband. That's what society and culture has taught women. And so they feel almost obligated. And then, as Sister Chan said, in that aspect of, well, that guilt, that if I don't fulfill him somehow, he's gonna go outside and find it somewhere else. And then you have outside kids. All of these things sort of lead to that unwilling participation. Whereas these things, I think, can be solved if we get to the root of the marital problems. You know, why is the woman not pleased? I think it goes back to love languages. Are men in tune with what's going on in the minds of their wives and understanding how they're fulfilled? Because it's not one sock fit all. You know, just because you feel like you are good looking or whatever doesn't mean that you are performing well to the point where your wife is pleased. But I'm gonna step back out of the area that's not my realm and get back to the legal part. You know,
you're fine. You're right ahead.
That would stand up legally.
Now, of course, this week we had in the news, you know, the celebrity news where the jury made a decision concerning awarding privileges one way or the other. I want to make reference to another news item, and perhaps that kind of is going to give empowerment to some women, maybe, I don't know. But I also read in the news this week, locally now, that a man was sentenced to, I don't remember whether it was 13 years in prison. This is the newspaper I'm reporting, because he kidnapped his girlfriend. held her in his house against her will on 2 separate occasions. Now the judge determined that that was unlawful, and therefore he sentenced this man to prison. Suppose they were married. Would it have been different? She wants to leave the house. He doesn't want her to leave, and he grabs her and he says, "No, you're not coming out of this house." Would the judge look at it the same if they were married?
Well, I think now you're starting to get into a different crime. That female can always suggest that there was some sort of domestic violence abuse, which we're not necessarily talking about the marital rape context, but just domestic abuse crimes like assault. If she's trying to leave and he's not allowing her to, kidnapping is a crime that falls under domestic violence in a lot of jurisdictions. Grabbing her hand, that could be sort of like a disturbance of the peace crime or an assault in the 3rd degree. And so those are independent crimes that a judge as part of in the domestic violence context can determine, yes, a crime did occur. And that person, whether or not it's their husband, can be held responsible. And we have a lot of those. We have a lot of husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend type domestic violence crimes. And those are a lot more accepted in the legal context in terms of, even going to trial, as long as you could prove that there was some sort of force or abuse taking place.
Now, because our time is going, I wanted to follow through on that, but in the interest of time, let me go to something else that I think may be of interest to our listeners likewise. Let's consider the implications of making, well, even before I do that, it's relatively easy for us to imagine a man raping a woman. How do we explain a woman raping her husband? Talk me through the dynamics of this, a woman raping her husband. I don't know which one of you want. Oh, go ahead, Sister Natasha.
I've never honestly come in contact, but I'm not, haven't been practicing law forever, but I've never in a criminal context come in contact with a woman raping a man. As a matter of fact, generally, Pastor Greene, we don't even get a lot of complaints in terms of marital rape, period, much less, where a woman is taking advantage of a man. I think when that does come up, you have a situation where there's some sort of mental deficiency involved, perhaps on both parties or on one party, or there's some sort of alcoholic, some sort of alcohol involved, and you would have that situation. I've personally never come in contact with it. I do agree that if it does happen, it should be equally punishable. Yeah, so I don't have much, unfortunately, to give in that regard, but the law protects woman to man as well. And if a man is influenced in that way, he should definitely report it. Do I think that men will be running to the courts or police station to report that they were raped by their wife? No, because there's that pride issue that men have. What are my friends gonna think? What, like, I'm a man, how I going to, I supposed to want this, and so how do I even suggest to the public that my wife raped me? Like, what do you mean? There are a whole lot of psychological issues that would come about in even a man having the courage to report this.
Well, I'm thinking, sister attorney, that there may be a good reason why a woman would want to do that, because I cited earlier that in some jurisdictions, if it can be proved that there was no sex for a period of 12 months, that the judge would readily grant a divorce. So if a woman is in a situation with that, she doesn't want a divorce, she doesn't want to be without her husband. The man is at home, maybe he has moved out, maybe he's sleeping in a different room, and she knows that he's planning to divorce her. And one of his arguments is going to be, Judge, listen, we haven't had sexual intercourse for the last 12 months. So she may decide to, put some Viagra in some drink or something that she knows he's going to take, and maybe some alcohol, knock him out, that kind of thing. And even record the fact that they were having sexual intercourse afterwards. To be able to prove to the judge, well, no, he's not right on this, and he could, when he gets to his state of consciousness, report it and say, well, this is a crime. I did not consent to this, Your Honor. So that is just one scenario I'm thinking of, that's a possibility. Sister Chan, you look very perturbed.
Well, it's about time to be perturbed. What I know, a number of years ago, there was this conversation, and it was in the court in one of the Caribbean islands, about a woman raping, it wasn't in the marital situation, raping a man. And what actually happened, it was thrown out because at that time, the definition of rape was the ability for the inability for the woman to penetrate. Okay, so rape was described as the penetration. A man can penetrate a woman, but a woman cannot penetrate a man. And because of that, it was thrown out. But now, I think rape is described in a number of various ways that can make it different. But originally, it was tied into one's ability to penetrate.
Interesting. Now, another issue that I want us to look at is, if it does happen that a situation of marital rape does come before the judge and it is proved to be correct, what are the implications? Is it a situation where the man or the woman will have to leave the home? What happens? Is it a warning? Is it, well, somebody's going to go to prison, and after the prison term, if one goes to prison and they come out of prison, do they go back to the marital home? What is likely to happen in a case like that?
Well, if it's a crime, then more than likely, if someone is found guilty, whether by a judge or a jury, they're going to be punished under the specific law or code that, has it been a crime. So if I was to give you an example of that from even our code here in the Virgin Islands, which is our rape in the first degree statute, it lists all the various different ways you could have rape in the first degree, which includes all the ones we mentioned before: resistance, forcibly overcome. And in coming towards the end of the statute, it lists what the punishment is. And in our context, if you're found guilty of rape in the first degree, you shall be in prison not less than 10 years, no more than 30 years. And so once there's a verdict by a jury, then the judge determines, well, what is the appropriate sentence here? Now, again, in the Virgin Islands, more than likely in a marriage context, you won't be able to be convicted of this because we do have the spousal consent exception. But it's pretending it was a jurisdiction that does not have that, then the judge would determine what's the appropriate sentence. And it could vary for different persons. There's no one shoe fit all. It depends on the circumstances, the actual crime, et cetera, et cetera. So if the judge sentenced the person to jail, then that's where that person's new home is. And depending on how long the person is in jail, they could lose some of their rights, which include property ownership. And, so in that context, it could be beneficial to the person who was abused. Now, if it's a jurisdiction where the law on the specific rape is not as heavy in terms of punishment as the one I just stated, because in our law, the minimum amount of time you could spend in prison is 10 years. But if it's a jurisdiction that doesn't give a minimum amount of time, and you could get something like probation, then yes, the question comes up, where do you go? Are you going to spend your probation or parole in the same marital home, or are you going to go somewhere else? Now, in that context, once someone's found guilty, the female or the male, whoever is the abused person, has a lot more momentum to get a divorce. And if this divorce is based on being raped, then they already, have an advantage. And if the divorce is granted to their advantage, then they have a lot of access to property, and they can determine whether the abuser gets to stay. But a lot of times in these contexts, people make up, going through the process, they have change of feelings, they end up back in the home. There's just so many avenues these cases can take, especially when you're talking about relationship and emotions and feelings. So unfortunately, there's no, cookie cutter answer. But, I think anyone who is thinking about raping their spouse, just think about the fact that you could get the worst case scenario and just don't do it at all. I mean, that shouldn't be your basis for not doing it, but if at all that's any type of deterrent, then you should consider that.
Well, in our remaining time, I want to deal with two issues. I think these are very important for us to look at. The consequences of persons who are being affected not speaking out or not seeking help. That's the first issue. And secondly, we're going to look at how we can, in general, avoid such cases. Now, I want to talk to these two issues because I do believe, and I think Sister Chan hinted that while people may not readily complain of sexual abuse in the marriage, that it is common, and some women suffer in silence. So a woman who is suffering in silence, let's talk about that. What is the impact on her? If she feels in that relationship that she is no longer an equal partner, she is there to serve the needs of her husband, to have sexual pleasure, and perhaps to cook and to wash and to clean, and that's the end of it. She doesn't want to have sexual intercourse because she's not being treated properly. She recognizes, for example, that maybe he has other relationships. She thinks that is not appropriate, but she has no voice. How does that affect her as an individual when she does not seek help, when she thinks that she has to accept this?
Okay, that could be answered on the long term in one straight line, simply by saying she eventually becomes mentally and emotionally divorced. Bottom line, okay? With time, she's there, but she is so pained, right? She could no longer live her true self. She's in the relationship, but she's mentally and emotionally divorced. More often than not, that's the time they come for help, okay? And it is so difficult, okay, to rebound, I had an incident where when the couple came to me, she looked at the husband and she said to him, "Why you bring me here now? I told us, I'll ask you to come to the pastor, to go here, to go to, you never showed up. Why you brought me here now?" She was already mentally and emotionally divorced, and they did divorce, okay? So they wait so long. I want to say one thing about Natasha's intervention just now, just to comment. The laws are there. The state has a right to protect and put the laws in place. What happens between the man and the woman in that context? The woman, because of the law, tries to protect him because she still loves him and wants him. She protects him again from the penalties of the law, so it goes undercover. If she insists, all right, on going that route, the probability of him taking her life and his life or one is very high. If you notice over the years, the more you want to, there's so many laws to protect women, but yet they're dying more. We had one only last week. They found her 1 year marriage and found her in the house 3 days after when he left. So was it driving? It driving her to the undercover because she doesn't want him to be penalized. And women are very good at that, okay? The penalties. And men can get so angry as a result of them putting them to the law their lives. And the men threaten them. You go to the police, you're going to see what's going to happen in here. Both of us will die, okay? And so that fear. Back to what happens in the bottom line, mental and emotional divorce. And at that point in time, there's no relationship. Absolutely.
I mean, that is painful, and it is really very unfortunate. There are some persons who still, maybe even with this program we're having this afternoon, think that we really shouldn't be talking about this. There are some persons who believe that once two people are married, that's their business and they sort it out themselves. And there are some persons who are very challenged by the idea of woman empowerment. They think that that is not something that we should be promoting or talking about. But we are seeing, as you just indicated, that there are lots of people who are suffering in silence, and some of them, unfortunately, are ending up dead. So that intervention is important. Sister Chan, you look like you really want to say something there.
You know, the Bible says people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and I see that every day. Moses chapter 4:6. If people know better, they are likely to do better. And, you know, I've had a number of men in programs who did not want to come, but was thankful. I share one. It was talking about rape of children. And for the first time, a man came to terms with what actually happens to women when that happens. He got up at the end of the session, he said, Mrs. Chan, if I see any man around my daughter, I think I'm going to kill him. Just by me having access to the page, which meant that he did not know. And there was another one, it was a counseling session for an organization, we talked about it. And the guy said, you know, I didn't really want to come, but I'm glad I did. So the thing about it is information, pertinent information that is shared particularly for men. That information for men must be shared in a way not to bombard them, not to destroy them, but in an acceptable manner so they can realize and get a deeper understanding of what women go through. As I said the last time, we need to understand that men in the women liberation movement and the empowerment, men have suffered a lot of mental and psychological abuse. So they have a block to come into the programs. In fact, you have to way to have men come to a program, because since they have violence, abuse, and rape, and probably they know a little bit of how they behave, they're not coming. They're not really interested. Okay.
Well, you know, I think generally.
Ways to...
Sorry for interrupting you, dear, Sister Chan. I was. I think your internet is challenged again, but let me just quickly
be consistent.
Let me just jump in here and say that I think generally men tend not to want to sit down in a forum that is given information on marriage, on relationships. My experience is that whenever we have seminars, and we do quite a bit, whenever we have seminars, we have family life, education, etc., the men are reluctant to come. In fact, in most cases, in a counseling setting, I see a man when, unfortunately, either the woman has thrown hot water on him or she has packed up and moved out and that kind of thing. And then is when he comes. So most times, 90% of the times, not 100%, but 90% of the times, when I get a call from a man for intervention, I know that things are really, really, really bad.
Exactly.
And it is unfortunate that the man has to wait until things get that bad to seek help. That really is very unfortunate. So if we can, for the next few minutes, well, just before that, I want to ask Sister Natasha this question, because I think one of the issues might be that people are still getting married without proper preparation. In some jurisdiction, it's relatively easy to get married. Not so, Sister Natasha. What do I have to prove to the states? in order for me to get permission to get married?
That you're not related to the person, that the person is there within the age bracket where you can consent to marriage and you can be married, and that you don't have an existing marriage on the books. Those are generally the top 3 things that if you have any of those, then you probably won't be able to get married. But outside of that, there's not much of a restriction on being married.
So let's compare this to getting your driver's license now. I mean, and I think everybody would agree that marriage is a lot more significant than having a driver's license, as important as having a driver's license may be. But if you're going to get a driver's license, you have to pass a written exam. You have to do a road test, and in some cases in the US, you have to do what do they call it, a 5-hour good driving course and that kind of stuff in order to get a driver's license. And you can get married without proving anything much. That kind of says something to me. Maybe, I'm just suggesting, maybe the states need to make it a little tougher for people to get married, not to prevent them from getting married, but ensuring that they go through a period of marital preparation. That I think is important. I don't know if any of you want to react to that quickly.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be beneficial to the parties. It's just a matter of developing how that would look. Because quite frankly, although we're Christians and we have an idea of what marriage is and should be, not many people get married for those reasons. People get married for a myriad of reasons that's not necessarily love and affection. And I'm not saying that that's right, but I'm just saying if the state puts certain prerequisites into place, and you have a couple that comes forward to be married, and they're not really into these counseling and prerequisites, because maybe I'm getting married for immigration purposes, or maybe it's a loved one, they've been together for 30 years and maybe someone is sick and he's decided to get married to ensure that properties distributed in a manner that they wanted to, or maybe for the kids, they don't care about the prerequisites. So having it legal may present some challenges, but I definitely think that there should be prerequisites in marriage. At this point, we have glorified marriage to a beautiful wedding, and we haven't really gotten into the years after. And even with the years after, I think we kind of have mastered maybe the first 5 to 10 years. But then after that, once you're with the same person and you really start to get out some of those frustrations, there's where the problem gets in. And even so, if we have counseling or whatever, I think the counseling needs to be meaningful. It has to be open, honest, and it should be meaningful. I think just the superficial counseling, God, a man and a woman should be together. You need to love your spouse. I think that kind of goes over the head and becomes routine. But if you talk about some of these issues, like, what if, we don't have sex in 3 weeks? What then? Those types of real conversations, I think, could be beneficial.
Well, it's amazing how many persons that I have seen over the years who, when you ask them what kind of marital preparation you had, some of them say, the pastor had a session with us. Some persons say, well, we didn't have any preparation. We just got married. So the matter of course, in the Seventh Adventist Church, we require that you go through a period of preparation for 6 months, counseling. And personally, I do practice after you get married, you have to make a few other appointments just to check to make sure that everything is going fine. Now there is a question that someone has posited here, and I want us to look at it a little bit. We don't have much time, but the individual is asking, how do we, let me get the question again, just a minute. It says, how can you put 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 5 in context of the discussion? And 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 5 says, stop depriving one another except by agreement for time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control? Interesting question. How do you put that in the context of the discussion?
I think that, for one, when a text talks about, and I'm not a theologian, but just my general take on it, stop depriving one another. I think that the idea is that we should recognize that sex is an important part of a relationship. And not just that, but it's a normal human need or reaction that shouldn't be ignored. And so I think in the context of the text, it's recognizing that this is something that's needed within a marriage by persons, and so it shouldn't be deprived. The idea that this deprivation should then lead to some sort of force, I think, is where we're probably taking that text a little bit too far. The last part of the text, Dr. Greene, I wanted to comment on. Can you just read that last portion?
Sure. So the last part, and come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control.
Right. I again, I'm not a theologian, but I think that if we read into it a little bit, suggests that we fix the issue, and fix it to the extent that you can enjoy sex and that you wouldn't be tempted to either do violence or go outside of the marriage. I mean, again, I'm not the theologian, but I don't think in any way that text suggests that marital rape is okay.
Well, last 2 weeks ago, Sister Chan said she was not a theologian, and she did such a fantastic job. And now this week you again. So we have budding theologians here. It's interesting that the idea of the expectation that there is sexual relations in a marriage, the Bible is making that, and that's true. You ought to have sex in marriage, but what we are saying is that sex is supposed to be enjoyable, meaningful, and there is supposed to be consent. So in a minute and a half, Sister Chan, what are some things that you would like to suggest to married couples to do in order to avoid the place where they get into this rut and they have to resort to force?
Okay, just let me quickly say, the text is we're not dealing here with deprivation, we're dealing with the quality and the dynamics of the interaction between the husband and wife. That's what we're trying to work with here. But what they need to do, the gaps are clear that came through here is a lack of information. Counseling is too short. The focus is on the wedding and not on the marriage. They are getting into contact with people. I think it's Helen White, it's that Satan is busy putting people together that he knows will make it. Okay. So you have to be able to have the information. Why the pathfinders and those groupings should have a place to help people, young people, to understand clearly what they're looking for.
Okay, we lost you again.
Identify challenges in the relationship before it happens, and the red.
Okay, so we lost Sister Chang again. Sister Natasha, I don't know if you want to make a point before we wrap up. You're muted, sorry.
Conversation is not about that. But this conversation is about giving people information so that when they're about to make choices, they will make their choices against having been informed. All right, that's what we're trying to do. But again, ongoing exposure to information, background checks, history checks, looking at the family of origin, where they're coming from, and what that can signal. All those things need to be involved in any systematic training program for young people.
Thank you
because
so
they take
much.
a lot of things for granted, and we have to, and we sometimes take things for granted. And not only that, just one more second to say, right? At that stage, when people are getting married, they're so emotionally charged. They don't see, nor they don't hear. Marriage is not the same. The ship is
That's
not
so true. That is so very true. Sister Natasha?
Well said.
Indeed. Well, our time is up, and we do have to wrap it up here. I do want to say one additional thing. I think Sister Chang said so much there, but I do want to say one additional thing, and that is, if you are married now, you need to make your marriage a priority. There are some wonderful books that are out there. Attend the seminars that this church has, because we do have quite a bit of marriage building seminars. Listen to Marriage Encounter. I spoke about that earlier. Do a marriage checkup every now and then. If your church runs a marriage club, that's an excellent thing, but we're out of time. I want to say that next week we will not be having Let's Talk. We will make arrangements for SLC Adventists to replay part 1 of abuse, because the following week, the 18th, we're going to be talking part 2 of not abuse, sorry, what was it? Abortion, because the following week we're going to be having, that's the 18th, we're going to be having part 2 of abortion. Thank you all so much for your time and for the wonderful bits of information that you were able to share. Those who are listening, please remember that this afternoon, the young people of the South Leeward Conference will be having a program called Keeping It Real. Sorry, Truth Be Told, Truth Be Told. And the topic for this afternoon is, what's the topic now? Let me get it. The topic for this afternoon's discussion is the Christian politics and activism. Well, thanks so much. May God bless you. See you on June 18 for another edition of Let's Talk.